This is the IBJ podcast for the week of May 12th, 2025, brought to you by Taft. I'm your host, Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. These are uncertain times for the U.S. economy. We are in a grace period for many of the Trump administration's promised tariffs on dozens of trading partners. U.S. consumer confidence plunged again in April, hitting its lowest level since October 2011. First quarter gross domestic product for the U.S. hit negative territory for the first time since the first quarter of 2022. Meanwhile, in the financial press, pundits are splitting hairs about how close we are to a recession. On May 7th, the Federal Reserve again opted to hold interest rates at the same level, waiting to see how President Trump's tariff policies shake out. At the same time, there are several positive indicators for the economy, including strong jobs reports. The almost unfailingly bullish President Trump recently told Americans via social media to, quote, be patient, end quote, for the economic boom that his policies will create. In essence, we're holding our collective breath to see how all this plays out. In the meantime, the Trump administration on May 5th resumed collecting on defaulted student loans, ending a 5-year pause that began during the COVID-19 pandemic. For more than 5 million student loan holders already in default, this is significant news, and millions more could join them in the near future. The redirection of their income to loan repayment likely will have an effect on the economy as well. IBJ columnist Peter Dunn, a.k.a. Pete the Planner, returns to the podcast this week to sift through the data and help us get a footing in this economic limbo. He also takes a closer look at the decision to resume collecting on defaulted student loans and the possible consequences. Here's our conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Peter Dunn, a.k.a. Pete the Planner. How are you, sir?
Hello, Mason. As we were getting ready for this this illustrious episode of your podcast, you and I were discussing what we were going to talk about, and we couldn't really talk about a particular topic because it changes every 20 minutes. And so, no matter
stop taking my lines,
is that what you said?
I'm gonna say that.
Okay, go ahead.
Here's what I was going to say.
Did you write it, or are you just going contemporaneously here?
There are no original thoughts here.
Okay, let's go. Let's hear it.
This is all from ChatGPT.
Okay, good.
As you know, there is a certain danger in scheduling a podcast to talk about U.S. trade or fiscal policy because the executive branch has been known to switch gears or completely reverse course at the drop of a hat. Now, you had an example. Sounds like you wanted to say something.
No, I just think that it's wild. I'm doing a news interview tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. And again, the day doesn't matter. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., I'm doing a news hit about a topic they sent me this morning at 9 a.m. What are the chances, Mason, that the truth is still the truth 21 hours later? That's the news cycle.
You know, working for a news organization that on one hand is like a 24-hour news service because we have this website that we've really built out, but also still has a weekly newspaper is uniquely problematic because we create a lot of content that's true in the moment, but we run into trouble, when the paper comes out on Friday.
So you and I apparently are then talking about things that happened days and weeks ago that can't change.
Right. That's my goal today, is talk about things that very likely will stay relatively the same.
We're jinxing it, but go ahead.
Okay. I have faith in Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
Well, that's unique to you and the president, given that he doesn't feel that way.
Yeah,
right?
I think he feels that way.
Yeah.
But on Wednesday, the Federal Reserve decided to keep its benchmark interest rate unchanged at the range, or in that range of like 4.25 to 4.5%. For folks who don't breathlessly follow the Fed's monetary policy decisions like we do, the federal funds rate sets what banks charge each other for overnight lending, but then that also has like a domino effect. It leaks into almost all other borrowing and saving rates that Americans would see, like rates on your credit cards, your mortgages, auto loans, and student loans. What was your first glance take on the Fed's decision to keep things in stasis.
It's when I think about these, I think about what I think they would do, are going to do, and then God forbid if I were in the role, what would I do? Which
Hmm.
is like a really dumb way to think about being the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Um, I thought this is what would happen, and in fact, I saw the futures market said there was like a 2.7% chance that what happened wouldn't happen, right? That they
Wow.
wouldn't hold steady. So in many respects, I thought that's what they would do. And I think it's really through the lens of the fears of stagflation. I think that's the story that needs to be told, that with a stagnant economy, which first quarter was down 0.3% in terms of contraction. Yeah. And then this quarter, we don't, we have a, this is, you and I used to talk about the vibe session last summer. This feels very, very vibe sessiony in the sense that like all these signs that we're in trouble are kind of happening, but the data, other than the first quarter GDP data, doesn't support the fact that all these bad things are happening. So, long story short, too late. I think we're in a stagnant growth economy, and if the tariffs really stick around, then you're going to have inflation. Stagnant versus inflation equals stagflation. And that's an ugly thing that Jerome Powell wants to avoid. And that's why he didn't lower the rate.
I just want to throw in a random story here.
Oh, I love
For,
it.
for, for those of us who think, we could do a better job managing the economy, I have a barely relevant story for this. So I spent the last, and you know what this is like, because you're a soccer coach, you're a youth soccer coach, your kids played soccer, uh,
Yes,
and continue to play soccer. Is that correct?
my
Some,
son does.
some does. Okay, right. So I spend a lot of time yelling things from the sidelines,
Mhm.
um, and don't understand why they make the mistakes that they do, or just make boneheaded plays that they do. Well, for the last practice, I was recruited to be the goalie so everybody else could work on their, on offensive spacing and stuff. And it was pathetic. And I was like, oh, I get it.
Oh, you mean
I
you were
understand.
pathetic, not the children
I was
shooting at.
pathetic.
Yeah.
And it was not my first time in goal, but I just realized, look, you really need to be able to be in goal to understand what's happening.
I don't know about you, and maybe this is too much editorializing, but it's kind of to your point of like, we look at these big decisions being made, whether it's from the Oval Office or the Fed's office. I don't know what shape Jerome Powell's office is, probably a square. Um, we look at these things and we go, well, obviously they need to do this or that, which is not really fair, in my opinion, because it's really complicated. We're talking about some of the most complicated concepts in economics. And so this idea of like, this is wildly simple. It's like, no, this is literally the opposite of wildly simple. So I'm not asking people to extend grace because what's it really matter? But this is shouldn't be so polarizing because this is really hard stuff.
So, do you recall how Fed Chair Jerome Powell explained the decision?
I mean, he must have been to the stag party as well because he's worried about stagflation. He's concerned about stagflation. Now, I will say this, late last week, look at me keeping things evergreen. Late last week, today, uh, President Trump came out on social media and said that, again, complaining about Jerome Powell, and again, he can do that, whatever. But then I read this article today, Mason, that kind of blew my mind a little bit. And it's not that I'm in the president's camp on this, but I hadn't considered this. So one of the reasons President Trump wants to lower the Fed rate is so that he has more leeway and more leverage with these tariffs. Like they will have less of an immediate impact on our economy. Now they could, if you lower the rates, it's still going to hurt us long term. But he thinks he can buy time by lowering rates. Guess what China is literally doing right now? Lowering their central bank rate. So they are doing what President Trump is asking Jerome Powell to do. And so now we're kind of one arm tied behind our back in that regard, trade war with someone who's doing what the president wishes he could do. And it's a sort of an unfair, and fair is always fun, right? It's sort of an unfair advantage.
That's interesting. I want to pick up on something that that you mentioned about a trade deal. So we're recording this on May the 8th. And this morning, the president announced not the details of, but the fact that there was now a new trade deal with the UK. And to my mind, I mean that sounds like the way that the strategy was explained, more or less. Going back several months, is these tariffs are going to be a starting point for negotiations. I mean, is it fair to say that that's going to how it's going to shake out? I mean, there's going to be how we start, and then there's going to be how we finish.
I mean, over the next couple of days in real time, by the time this podcast come out, I love that we said we're not going to talk about this because of the changing nature of it, and now we're talking about it and then equivocating with the changing nature of it. It's beautiful. But what we're going to find out is is the trade deal good? Is it objectively or even subjectively good? I think what everyone's waiting for, and hopefully by now, as people are listening to this, we know, did we actually get anything, or did we somehow was all for naught? Is the deal somehow better than the reality we had been living for the last several years? And I think that's the story. It either is or it isn't, because otherwise you're just claiming victory on something that isn't really a victory. And I hope we got something, I guess. I don't, we'll see. I'm really anxious to see the details of the deal.
Okay, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
Taft, today's modern law firm. With more than 800 attorneys in 8 primary Midwest markets and the District of Columbia, we provide solutions to the business issues facing middle market and emerging companies alike. We do this through a highly collaborative and inclusive team approach. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
All right, we're back with the latest episode of the IBJ Podcast and my conversation with Pete the Planner about fiscal policy. Tell me, why does President Trump want rates lower?
Because it gives him more of a negotiation tool with China, first of all, and then all the other countries, because businesses can better protect themselves against the impact of the tariff. They can continue to invest in their businesses. They won't lay off as many people. And so there'll be like an artificial stimulation of the economy in so doing. I'll also note that it will temporarily cause low inflation. So it'll be like a perceived low inflationary environment, which then the challenge with all of this is, because everything I just said sounds pretty good. Like everyone's like, yeah, okay, let's lower it. However, the challenge there is there's going to be like this whipsaw component to it that will have good short-term impact from lowering the Fed's rate. But if the tariff continues on and layoffs happen because business leaders say, I'm still not willing to take the risk, and then there's the inflationary environment of people buying cars at 25% more, then everything's going to be so much worse than ever before in that regard. So the Fed's just like, we're not gonna stimulate this thing until we really know what's going on. And so that's sort of the debate, parts of it at least.
Yeah, I think that Powell said something to the effect of, we're not in a big hurry, but we want to see how this stuff shakes out first.
And again, no one really cares what I would do, but I think it's like, whose argument do I buy more? I buy the Fed's argument, at least this time around. I think they were asleep at the wheel a little bit in terms of lowering interest rates the last time they did it. But this time around, I kind of agree with them, but who knows?
Okay. I have one other topic here that is very likely to stay where it is for at least the next 5 days.
Absolutely.
Ready? So last Monday, see, we're even broadening the scope here on the calendar. Last Monday, I think May the 5th, the federal government resumed collecting on defaulted student loans, which ended a 5-year pause that began during the COVID-19 pandemic. And here's just a little bit of background for everybody. About half of all students with a bachelor's degree graduate with debt. It averages about $29,000. There are more than 42 million Americans holding student loans right now, and collectively, The outstanding federal education debt exceeds $1.6 trillion. Now, more than 5 million of these borrowers are currently in default. And that total could rise to roughly 10 million borrowers within the next few months as collections get underway. Technically, default means you have failed to make a loan payment for the last 270 days. And being in default is a big problem because it's on your credit record, especially for young folks. That's no fun. The pause was initiated in March 2020 by the first Trump administration, but President Biden extended the pauses. He also attempted to grant forgiveness to a large share of the student loan holders, but those moves were blocked by the Supreme Court and Congress. Payments on the loans resumed in October 2023, but collections did not. I'm going to put on my hat as a cranky 57-year-old taxpayer, so it's a big reach for me. That all sounds reasonable. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a doozy. What's the old the parenting advice when you're trying to parent young kids? You have to say, now two things can be true at the same time, right? This is is how you like prevent your kids from being weird. This is, I agree, man. Like, I'm not, hey, you took out the loans, you better repay. I'm not that hardcore, but this isn't like there are a couple sides to this, but this one doesn't, people borrowed money. They've had a tremendous amount of leeway, 5-6 years, honestly, 5-6 years. And then they're saying, okay, the leniency's over. I think this is interesting to me because people love to get upset about this kind of stuff. And I understand. I also know I've never personally had student loans. So at least I'm telling you what I'm dealing with here. But I don't think the Trump administration's in the wrong here. I just don't. And I think it's just, yeah, you gotta pay your debts, you know? How can we see that differently? Let's just go that way. I wrote a column a few weeks ago in which I tried to see something different and communicate with something I didn't agree with in a way that I would have communicated with if I agreed. Did it backfire? Probably, based on my email inbox. But with this, Mason, let's adopt the other perspective for a second. Like what? Okay, well, that's unfair. Have at it. Why is it unfair?
Why is it unfair to reinstate the collections?
Why is it unfair to restart the collections? We're taking the opposite approach here.
Oh boy. I already told you I put on my hat of the cranky 57-year-old. Now I'm supposed to put on the hat of like the 24-year-old guy who's still living with his parents and can't find a job in his degree, which is environmental science, which apparently is not as in demand as it used to be. If you fail to respond to the collections, they can seize your tax refunds. So let's say, your job driving a bus for Washington Township. So they can, let's say you reported that income, they can seize your tax refund. They can, at some point, they will start garnishing paychecks. And then Social Security. I know that there's some folks who feel like, this period of grace was so long to turn around and say, hey, we're going full bore back into collections is, quote, unfair, unquote. I'm sure I would feel that way if I was the 24-year-old living with my parents. I have to admit, I don't feel that way as somebody who has been paying off his mortgage for 15 years every month without fail.
Is it possible this is a bipartisan issue? Is it possible that a majority of people, like a significant majority of people go, yeah, it's okay. That's fine. Because I kind of feel like this might be one of those things.
Yeah. So you don't see any potentially adverse economic outcomes from this decision?
I didn't say that. I think there will definitely be economic adversity from this because it's going to theoretically, here's what could maybe happen. Not stoking fear, but here's what could happen. It could pull more discretionary spending out of the economy, which could, depending on what consumer confidence is doing and consumer spending this summer, if we're in a recession, it could actually accelerate the recession because then people won't have money to spend, especially if the tariffs are still there. So it's complex in the sense that, does the government want, we'll call it tax revenue, even though it's not tax revenue, we'll just call it revenue. They want repayment on the money they've lent, which is good, right? Because there's so much government spending being cut and taxes being cut on the horizon, possibly, that at some point in time, they'll have to say, well, this is actually a really good thing. The American government's getting repaid. But if we're in a recession and tariffs are still wrecking people, like, the timing's weird. I'm not critical of the timing because I think it's probably time for people to start paying their debts again, but it could have unintentional consequences. How about that? Random anecdote. I spoke at an HR conference yesterday, and I was talking to HR people, and their HR jobs are much different than most people think they are. A lot of times they're dealing with things like garnishments, right? They're dealing with the payroll challenges of someone doesn't pay their debts. In certain populations, in certain industries, you're going to see mass garnishments. You're just going to see companies dealing with a population of workers who are so financially stressed by this that it's going to really impact employers too. And again, that's not to say we shouldn't do it. And by the way, I don't get a vote in this, but it's not to say that the president shouldn't do this, because I think he should. But it is going to be a monster. You're going to have a generation of folks, just call them Gen Z, that aren't exactly financially stable yet because of housing prices and education prices and these sorts of things. And you're just going to shrink their discretionary income a little bit more, potentially in a period of time in which layoffs may be nigh. And the New York Times had a really interesting article this week about this idea that, like, all the signs for a recession are here, all of them, but none of the data backs up the signs. And I read that article, I was like, that's how I feel. Like every whistle in alert is going off, except when you looked at the last two jobs reports, you're like, okay, we're okay right now. We're fine right now. You look at the last inflation report. Okay, we're okay right now. The Fed's going, we're not panicking yet. We're going to keep things that they are. Okay, we're okay right now. It's like, Mason, like, this is going to be the slowest run up to a recession ever, and lights have been going off for 3 months.
A recession has to be what, 2 quarters of negative GDP? Is that the conventional
2 quarters?
Yeah, is that the conventional definition of recession?
Yes. And so we're obviously have one, right, at 0.3. Some people will say, though, and again, who cares who's right about this? Some people will say, well, we're actually 0.3 is close enough to be flat. You could say 0.3 is negligible. So then if you want to buy that argument, you look at Q2 and Q3, and I think that's where what happens with the tariffs is going to tell the entire story. I'm so shocked by the last jobs report that I'm shook because I'm glad there was a great jobs report, but it just goes completely against all of the other signs that we're seeing around what's happening in the economy. And so it's really strange. And I mean, to be honest, at some point are we going, well, where's all the fear coming from? You and I are both part of the media, so I get to say things like, is the media stoking fear? Right? I don't know. How do you feel about that? Like, it's weird. The data's not there for a recession other than 0.3% contraction. But man, every single sign is.
Boy, that's interesting. That's how we get back into the vibe session. How do we feel as opposed to, what does the data indicate? I mean, you and I, maybe you more so than I, are just in good shape.
Physically, I have been working out, and I appreciate you noticing.
You notice
Count my
I'm
macros.
wearing one of these True Classic T-shirts that kind of accentuates the good stuff and gets rid of the other stuff.
Boy, someone got a sponsorship deal.
I probably sell it's like NIL for
Yeah.
journalists. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I feel okay. I will tell you that my wife does not feel okay. But I mean, when you get right down to it, I mean, objectively, we're both employed. I think we're both fine, but we know that we're not everybody. And, and we're not as exposed to risk as a lot of people are.
I think in metaphors, which is my downfall. It's why I'm annoying to be with most of the time. But it's like we're holding our breath for this recession. And what might just happen is that we pass out before we get there. Before the jump scare even happens, because we're holding our breath, it's like self-sabotage. And so it is a peculiar time. Not that it matters. I've never felt this way about the economy where I'm like, we're about to get punched in the teeth. And then it just hasn't happened yet. Now, I will say this, May 9th is the day on record that everyone's like, well, that's when you're going to start feeling the impact of the China tariffs because of when the container ships did or did not leave China. Okay, so we'll see, right? So this week that we're now in, as we all listen to this glorious award-winning podcast, is like that's when we should start feeling the impact of the tariffs universally. So that either will or will not happen, because I've been reading articles and writing them for the last 30 days that says that's going to happen this week.
Okay. I like metaphors a lot. I think holding our breath.
But they're the only. Trust me, I've been married for 25 years. My wife's done with my metaphors. Like, she's really done. You wonder if second marriages begin at the last marriage being sick of metaphors. Maybe it's a writer thing. I don't know.
This is a hoary cliche, but I spend a lot of time, thinking to myself, of all the things that I can find to complain about, I really need to spend more time thinking about how things could be worse. My problems are not that bad.
So it's funny you say that, because you touched on it a minute ago with the vibe session that we talked about last summer. You and I, again, were like, things feel fine, but a bunch of people were like, things aren't fine. But the economic data said we're fine. Now, you and I are saying things don't feel fine. But the current economic data that at least we're privy to right now says we're fine. So it's like a different vibe session. It's like a different group of people are now saying, oh no, but nothing's exactly happened yet. But are we days away? Are we hours away? Are we a news cycle away? Are we quarters away? I don't know.
Okay. So we've made previously made a little bit of hay about how great you've been at predictions.
Oh man.
Are you willing to go 3 for 3? Or at least attempt a 3 for 3?
I'll try. But I mean, look, it's getting harder. I mean, it is again, the jobs report came out last week, or to whatever, the end of the month.
Yeah. It's always the first Friday of the month.
Yeah. I was so wrong. I told a buddy the morning it came out, I was like, hey man, keep an eye on this. And he texted me, he's like, what am I looking for? I'm like, something that's not there. I was wrong, but I will try. What am I predicting? I think we will have another contractionary period. I think we are going to see a technical or academic recession. I think that is going to happen.
Another quarter of negative growth.
Another quarter of negative growth. And look, I know I'll be on the podcast between now and then, but I do think the Fed will end up lowering rates late fall. Yeah. I think, because I think the tariff stuff should be over, but that's where I'm probably wrong.
Wait, the impact of the tariffs?
Not the impact of the tariffs. I think that good catch. The impact of the tariffs are why they're going to have to lower rates, in my estimation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But I think tariff madness
Yes. Tariff tumult.
Yeah, tumult is going to be over. So functionally over, but the impact will obviously carry on for a few quarters. And I think that's why interest rates will be lowered. I was wrong to some degree about my post-election prediction about Elon Musk. I said anything that he's involved with will benefit from Trump's election, President Trump's election.
Right.
I was kind of wrong about that. I mean, you could argue that he's gotten more government contracts or froze out people this way or the other, but Tesla stock got hammered. His credibility, his Q score, if you will, took a beating. So I can't claim that I was right about that one.
Yeah, and that he, I don't know exactly what his timing was, at least as he understood it, his timing was for pulling back on his activities in Doge. But I think after Tesla's most recent quarterly reports, which were disappointing for sure, he made a point of saying that he was pulling back.
I will say that the auto tariffs were pointed to benefit Tesla because of how much manufacturing they did in the United States. I don't necessarily think that was intentional, but it set Tesla up to do okay because through the top 10 cars in the United States that are really manufactured in the United States are Teslas. So it did set up to help him, but clearly it hasn't yet.
Okay. All right. Well, the great thing about it is we can come back in 2 months and correct the record. All right. Well, thanks so much for all your time.
Thanks, Mason.
My thanks again to Pete Dunn. And a quick reminder, his column on personal finance appears regularly in the print edition of IBJ, and you can find several years' worth of his work at IBJ.com. And folks, before you get on with the rest of your week, there are several features. In this week's edition of IBJ, I want to draw to your attention. The focus of our annual innovation issue is startups, including Indiana firms seeking to disrupt the healthcare, defense, agriculture, and wearable device industries using AI, quantum computing, and other emerging technologies. We also unveil the top 25 fastest growing Indianapolis area firms, as well as the winner of the Mickey Bauer Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And the lead debate in this week's Forefront magazine stems from the question, are tariffs an effective way to bring manufacturing back to the U.S.? Again, you can find these stories and features in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at IBJ.com. Now, it's quite a bit easier to access all of the latest local business news and all of IBJ's data on Central Indiana's business, community, and economy if you're a subscriber. We're running a promotion right now that gives you complete access for $1 per week for 3 months. Just to get a sense of how valuable and original this content is, just go to IBJ.com and click on the subscribe button. And thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.
Get ready for full throttle coverage as we shift into high gear for Business at the Brickyard, presented by LiUNA with support from the City of Westfield and Daniel's Family Vineyard and Winery. We're giving you the inside track on the powerful connection between motorsports and the Indiana economy. Join us at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes access, and the stories that drive the business of motorsports. So buckle up and join us for Emmy Award-winning Business at the Brickyard coverage all month long.